a bit. And a little longer section, so a little bit more consistency in terms of look is very good.
Okay, as we talked about earlier, I have an Atlas center stand here, and I want to find a good way to locate these tabs, which are for the center stand. And so finding out where this goes along here has proved to be a little bit tricky. But again, this is kind of a first sort of prototype of our frame jig and our design, and you know, it could happen that these have to be tweaked or moved. But looking at some of the drawings that I've been able to scrounge up, there's not much on these frames. I know that there's a kind of a measurement from this point on the frame, kind of where this bracket comes and where the bend stops. I know that that distance from here to the center of the bracket mount is 6 inches. So if I kind of eyeball this at 6 inches, that puts it about right here. So another way to measure it, since there's not a great place to know exactly where this starts, is to measure it from this rear sort of frame tube distance here. Let me pan the camera just a little bit. Yeah. So this is a pretty good reference, the outer edge of this down tube right here. And this tells me that this distance to the center line of the center stand mount is 12 inches. So that 12 inches, hard to see this thing. 12 inches. I'm going to put a little mark on this 12 inches just so I can see it better. All right. So again, using this rear edge of this rear part of the frame tube, measuring that forward 12 inches. I'll make a little mark here also. And maybe a little higher. Sorry, that's a little high. Just double check that. You know, it's right in there. It's difficult to get an exact location, but this puts us very close to this 6-inch mark. Down here. Actually, I'm going to measure it the back way. Yeah, so if I put that at the mark, so 6 inches is actually right here, back from that. So very close in relation to the end of this bracket. So we're going to go with that. So just to make this a little easier, I'm going to mark the center line of this bracket. Try to get a good, little bit off. That's going to put that about right there. And what you'll notice is that there's so many angles in this frame. You know, you cannot put this just in line with the frame tube because it actually has to be cocked a little bit, in that the frame tube is not square, it's tapering in towards the front. So we have to get that angle correct so that the bolts can line up correctly and smoothly and not have a real stiff, weird center stand to push on. Okay, so let's mark the other one. Again, so just getting that center line there and there. Actually, do that one again. And we'll line that up. We're going to make a mark on the other side. You know, as we've talked about, the more ways you can measure something to kind of confirm a measurement, the different ways, helps you to get a more accurate measurement. Okay, so there's 12. 11, 12. All right, we got a mark there. Okay, so the next part of this is to basically mock up, you know, our position here for the center stand. So I'm going to use this bolt, and I'm going to put the two brackets, but I'm also going to be putting spacers on here. And I've kind of roughed these in, so I've got a pretty good idea. But, you know, we may have to tweak it. So putting a bunch of shims, large washers I'm using as shims on here, and a large aluminum spacer, and another sort of tapered washer so it gets a good center on it. I'll slide this through so you can see kind of what we're going for here. This way, by tightening this bolt, it will set the proper angle for these. Again, we can't mount them in line with the frame tube. They have to be cocked a little bit so that this center stand bolt can come across perpendicular to the whole center line of the frame. So if we do the same thing over here, put our washer, our large spacer, some of these smaller ones. How many did I put on there? 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then just kind of a washer and a nut. Okay, so by tightening that up, you can see that this puts it in a nice sort of straight across, and it's going to set the exact angle that these brackets go this way. Since they can't go in line with the tube, they have to be cocked a little bit to get this bolt freely to mount. we'll probably, I mean, I think we'll be using individual bolts here in the final, because some of the engine stuff comes through here. So what I'll do before I tack any of this, let me go back and double check all these measurements, and then we'll put a couple of tacks on here. Okay, again, so mocking up this center stand mount using these two brackets here, I've actually clamped a flat, sort of a 3/4 by 2 inch piece of, just a piece of scrap tubing that I had. I've clamped it onto the rear sort of engine mount tube here. Counting on this being square, I'm using this flat piece here just to align the bottom edge of that cross tube on the center stand. So I'm in other words, I'm kind of forcing it to be square with the rest of the frame, assuming that this frame member is in fact square, which I believe it is. So just by clamping this, again, it's sort of another version of a jig, I'm making sure that the center stand is aligned with the center line of the frame. And then I just put a clamp here to hold this down. And again, what this is allowing is for these brackets to actually be crooked on this tube. They're actually canted a little bit that way so that this bolt can be straight, even though the frame tubes taper in up here at the front and all the way up, tapering up to the neck. So there's quite a bit of taper in there. You can't see it as much back here, but it's there. So we'll go ahead and tack these in, again, using just this simple flat piece of stock to square these two up to each other. Hope that makes sense. Okay, so we've got this sort of working center stand mocked up here with our brackets that we just welded. And so there's, you know, a few little other brackets we talked about that we can start to put on here. Some of them go down in this area, right, just like that, to additionally support this rear shock mount. And I've got one mocked up here with just this magnet assembly. Just holding it in place. And we'll go ahead and tack that up.